At Material ConneXion, we look at the world differently than most people do.
Brands come to us when they are facing a material problem. Maybe they have a great idea, but aren't quite sure whether there's a material out there that's going to support their needs.
A client may come to us saying they need a material that can be perhaps more sustainable or more stretchy or bouncy. It's my job to look at the fundamental material properties to solve that problem. We can provide clients with a unique cross-industry perspective because our library, which has been growing for the last 20 years, looks at materials from all industries, perhaps industries that our clients haven't looked at: agriculture, medical, military, aerospace, that sort of thing.
We often see designers and engineers having vastly different discussions among one another. One will come with aesthetic as the primary focus, and engineers, of course, are going to come more with an idea of how are those materials going to fit. What we do that's unique is we offer a conversation where both of those groups can really come to the table and have one conversation.
For me, there's no other place like Material ConneXion. We have a depth of material experience through our library, and our material research that is unparalleled anywhere else. I think it's fair to say that we're a partner rather than a service outsourcer.
What's changed the most about Material ConneXion since its inception is the way we collaborate with our clients. We are working with them end-to-end on product development, identifying ways that we can make their product better, stronger, lighter. It's a completely different experience. It's a collaborative experience.
Hello and good morning. Welcome to the Future of Global Sourcing. This is part of our Materials Matter Materials for an Extreme Future webinar series. I am Jennifer Gumpert, VP of Operations here at Material ConneXion. I will take just a moment to go over some housekeeping notes for all of you in case you run into any trouble. For today's presentation, the best results can be achieved using Google Chrome. That's the recommended browser for the platform that we're on, which is Livestorm. If you have any technical difficulty, please click the help link at the top of the webinar screen for assistance. You can see here there's a little arrow, there's a help button there for you. Throughout today's presentation, we will invite you to ask questions. You can submit your questions through the questions tab at the right of the screen, and we will try to answer them in due course. We will be releasing a few polls during the talk today. Please feel free to weigh in through the polls tab also to the right. A replay will be sent out to all registrants today after the webinar has ended. Be sure to check your spam folder if you don't see it by this afternoon. For those of you that are joining us as part of our academic membership, you will be receiving separate links to the recordings today to share with your students and faculty. And if you're tweeting or sharing any aha moments from today's event, please be sure to use the hashtag #MaterialsMatter. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, our host, Dr. Andrew Dent, who is our EVP of Research here at Material ConneXion. Andrew plays a key role in the expansion of Material ConneXion's technical knowledge base. His research directs the implementation of consulting projects and the selection of innovative, sustainable, and advanced materials to our material library. As EVP of Research at Material ConneXion and Chief Material Scientist at Sandow, Dr. Dent has helped hundreds of clients from Whirlpool and Adidas to BMW and Procter & Gamble, as well as tech companies such as Google, Facebook, Apple, and Samsung, to develop or improve their products through the use of innovative materials. A leading expert on sustainable materials, his insight has played an important part in creating a new generation of more sustainable products. Dr. Dent also oversees the materials knowledge of the Sampling Service Material Bank as part of the Sandow Company. He is a frequent speaker on sustainable and innovative material strategies, having given 2 TED Talks at TEDx Grand Rapids and TED NYC, and is the co-author of the Material Innovation book series, which includes packaging design, product design, and architecture. Also joining us today is our special guest, Michael Robinson. Michael serves currently on the board of directors at Ynvisible Interactive and is the insights lead at FritzWater Vest. Michael works in the intersections of packaging and product development, business design, and innovation strategy. Having worked at Hasbro Toys, he has helped build, lead, and evolve a packaging and beauty tool team at Bliss World LLC, and has guided category industrial design, user experience, and innovation within the global design and packaging team at Colgate-Palmolive. Michael graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology and holds multiple US patents. Currently, Michael serves as an independent board member of Ynvisible, the Human Insights Consultant at FritzWater, and Director of Open Innovation and Business Development for Packaging Innovation at L'Oreal Americas. A proud Brooklyn resident, Michael is passionate about supporting his community by raising money to send kids from low-income families to sleepaway camp via Camp Brooklyn Fund. To introduce today's topic and kick things off, please allow me to introduce you to your host, Dr. Andrew Dent. Andrew?
Hello there, and thanks for tuning in. So, as you see from the title, we're interested in the future of global sourcing. Discussion really will focus on how brands will need to rethink manufacturing in a post-COVID world. Will the current disruption of global supply chains cause challenges, and how are we going to solve it and rethink the way we produce? Is the new interconnected fact of the world, is it going to change the way we think about sustainability? Are there ways in which we can future-proof products? So today I'm really excited to talk with Michael. Michael I've known for many years. He's been a friend and partner of ConneXion. And for me, he's an innovator, an instigator, a collaborator. There's tremendous insight and experience. So happy to have him talk to us about this. I almost didn't want to do an introduction just because I kind of want to get into the meat of the conversation with him as quickly as possible. But we are sort of, with talking to our brands, we are seeing that beyond the basic ideas of concern about viruses and bacteria, of course, our need to clean things, our need to then make things potentially antibacterial, make things resistant to more harsh chemicals, how are our products going to change? How are our products going to have to adapt to the new world in which we're finding ourselves in? You know, our human interactions, the way we enter spaces, the way that we will sort of just touch other things. We were having a conversation a little earlier about handshakes, about our handshakes now going to go away. Those simple things that you never really thought about up until now, is that same thing going to happen with our products? Are there small changes we can have in our products that can make big changes when it comes to people's appreciation of them, a desire to have them, and their feeling of comfort around them? So, okay. So, thinking about this and bringing in Michael, who has a wealth of experience in the whole world of brands, of strategy regarding sustainability, of just innovating in the world of materials and packaging. Michael, just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and your work history. How did you get to where you are now?
Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate your introduction. As an instigator, I try to be the best instigator that I can. Unfortunately, I'm a little cursed from my background. I'm actually a designer by training. I'm a product designer, industrial designer. So naturally, I think a bit naturally, I gravitated towards material connection at a very early time in my career. Thank you for the introduction of my background, but to kind of go backwards, currently I serve as the Open Innovation and Business Development Lead for Packaging Innovation for L'Oreal Americas. I support a team of 12 amazing packaging engineers, development experts, to do really front-end development and innovation of cosmetic products, specifically focused on packaging innovation. I came from Colgate-Palmolive before that, a very different organization, different type of organization, supporting the global industrial design team, specifically focused on home care with personal care and pet care categories. And that was a great experience, great exposure to obviously a great enterprise organization that has been able to remain agile and transform itself through the years. And before that, cutting my teeth in beauty with Bliss. Bliss was founded by Marcia Kilgore in the late 90s. And I came on board with Bliss as they were expanding into Sephora and engaging with Starwood Hotels, their parent company at the time. And really had a great experience, not only getting firsthand exposure to how do we create department to even support our market expansion, but also, how do we develop and continually evolve based on a brand promise, a core brand promise of the best spa and skincare combined. So that was a really great experience. One of my first experiences working in New York City as well. So before that, as I mentioned, my background is in industrial design, product design and development. And I currently serve on the boards of Ynvisible Interactive, which is a printed electronics and electrochromics company located in 3 locations in Europe, in Portugal, Sweden, and Germany. And I currently serve on the board of FritzWater Vest as more like an active member, supporting the human insights component of developing flexible packaging solutions for water scarcity, water challenged, food scarce communities. And I serve on the board of Camp Brooklyn Fund, which is supporting my Brooklyn community, which I'm very passionate about.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So, your experience working with Colgate-Palmolive and also L'Oreal, unlike a lot of brands, those brands still do, unlike a lot of brands who've outsourced their production to Asia, those brands are still manufacturing here in the US and Europe and, globally, but also often in the places where they're selling. So you don't have that fear of suddenly the contentiousness we have with China causing problems, but you do have this huge global brand with sourcing all over the place, although you'll have specific brands in particular locations such as the US or parts of Europe or let's say Japan. How do you deal with that level of complexity when it comes to global sourcing? Does L'Oreal, or do you have a single vision about the supply chain, or at the moment is it just way too complex? And do you see there being a way in which you can improve that given the current situation?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think that the question is, we can look at that question on multiple levels. And I think one of the great comparisons you've just made is between L'Oreal and Colgate-Palmolive. So the main differences between those two companies, not only the categories that they serve, but also Colgate-Palmolive, as you rightly said, is a vertically integrated company, right? So that supply chain is very, very carefully managed vertically through the company. L'Oreal is a bit of a hybrid. We both, if you've followed the news, L'Oreal has actually been able to pivot its factories to make critical items like hand sanitizer and personal care products for our first responders. But also a big portion of L'Oreal's L'Oreal brands, their ability to deliver products to market is relies on external partners as well. And so a big part of my role at L'Oreal in open innovation is really to get external, find the source, scout those external partners. So just a couple of mental frameworks that I use to think about our supply chain. So think about supply chains in general. Number one, supply chains aren't just about materials, right? They're also about the flow of materials, finance, goods, services. And one of the things that I found really fascinating in this time is that the general public now has exposure to supply chains.
Yes.
A senator said yesterday very keenly, people know that the chicken that they buy does not come from the grocery store anymore. Right?
Yeah.
So think about that. That's mind shifting in a lot of ways. So when you begin to say, okay, if I look at my supply chain as not only the movement of goods and materials, but also a finance of services, et cetera, then you begin to kind of open up a broader sphere of what a supply chain is and the levers that are available to shift your supply chain. Mm-hmm. And the things, obviously, that being able to address risks to that supply chain, these exogenous shocks that are hitting our supply chains as well. So, to maybe give a concrete example, one of the things at L'Oreal that are, to your question, is a driving force around our supply chains and delivering those goods and services is really our sustainability strategy and our ability to take on, be agile and take on the challenges that we see in this VUCA environment, right? Volatile, uncertain, et cetera environment. We've adopted that terminology from the military. So when you begin to look at an overarching and a guiding sustainability strategy, that really does dictate how you act and react and plan for these types of disruptions. And I think L'Oreal's done an excellent job in their Sharing Beauty with All strategy, really helping clarify those guardrails, not only for our external partners, right, which are very important to us and our success, but also for our internal teams as we plan. I think further on, making commitments, L'Oreal is very good at making specific commitments and sticking to them. One of them is, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Moonshot 2025 goals. And taking on these challenges helps us be more agile, helps us plan for not only our present, but act for our present, but also plan for our future.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that there's going to be, so you're saying that the desire to change your supply chain ideas was already there because of sustainability, and do you think that and yes, we as consumers now know that there is a supply chain, and we are now concerned about not just is there enough stuff in the grocery store, but then a couple of steps further back from that, we now are aware of that. Do you think that all brands are going to need to rethink their supply chains, given that we are likely to have, in an extreme future, more of these sorts of situations happening? Do there needs to be a greater robustness in where you get your raw materials from, where you do your manufacturing? Do you see that as changing as to being more local? Do you see that as changing as simply just because I need multiple different sources to make sure that if one has a challenge due to, let's say it's bad weather, let's say it's some other catastrophe, I then can rely upon an alternative source?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The way I look at the idea of resiliency, which is, I think, overall what we're realizing is supply chains that have been purpose-built to be more resilient, but also exposure of supply chains that are not resilient, that are actually quite fragile, right? And I think when we start to think about that, there's really, again, kind of three aspects that I like to think about. One is agility. As I said, how agile is the framework of your organization, right? How are you able to deliver value in different ways? That ties into redundancy. So, we're here feeling the effects of COVID, but a year ago, we were talking about the effects of our tariff policy. And a year before that, we were talking about China's green sword policy. It's shifting the fundamental value of recycling streams. So when we think about redundancy, we're thinking about exactly that. What local resources do I have available that can supplement or complement, that can be turned on when need be? I think one of the challenges with redundancy right now that we're seeing, that I'm seeing at least, is a lot of technologies, processes, and resources have been offshored. And while you may have certain manufacturing technologies available here locally in the United States, you don't have all of the pieces, right? Either it has been networked, or it has been offshored, right? There's either we've used things like just-in-time type processes, or we've taken more expensive, costly processes and offshored those things. So when we think about redundancy, we also have to think about that value chain connection. How do we make connections to capabilities that may not exist. And that's where I think Material Connection is also an excellent resource. And that ties into the third aspect of innovation, right? How can we leverage innovation to help us think differently about those gaps in our value chain and be able to fill in where things may be missing, as well as reimagine, right? So do we have opportunities to shift the solution appropriately to meet not only our critical user needs, not only our sustainability strategies, but also just fundamental capabilities, our supply chain, fundamental supply chain.
Yes, so I remember IKEA a number of years ago, in order to reduce its cost and in order to simplify its supply chain, it went from a couple of hundred different types of plastics down to just a handful, and it solved a lot of their problems because it obviously allowed them to, buy in bulk, allowed to make sure that that they could keep the prices down significantly. Do you see that sort of singular approach to supply chain where you just sort of like, okay, I'm going to make sure everything's made out of one thing, and I'm therefore going to buy huge amounts of it, therefore I can reduce its cost, therefore, pass those costs, those reductions in cost onto the consumer? Do you see that now as fundamentally fragile because of concerns about unpredictability?
Yeah, mono-sourcing, definitely. Mono-sourcing in and of itself is a very risky kind of venture. I mean, of course, as you mentioned, trying to get economies of scale on commodity items is key. But I think we also have to look at what's happening, right? So exogenous shocks like OPEC driving down oil prices,
sure,
right, has put a strain on an already strained recycling infrastructure system, right? Now, yes. How do I value recycled PET, right? Now that I know that oil prices can go below zero. We've never, ever seen something like that kind of shock.
Yes.
So now you're fundamentally challenging how the infrastructures that we've built to create value around recycling and sustainability. So it's a hard question to answer, Andrew. Mm-hmm. But again, I think mono-sourcing creates that fragility. So if my mono source is PET and mm-hmm. PET only and rPET only, then I've got a challenge, right? Mm-hmm. I think in the light of OPEC. The other aspect is the shorter the supply chain, the less risky the endeavor, and more transparent it possibly can become. Not only transparency internally, but also externally. So
can you explain what shorter supply chain means? Can you kind of explain what that means? Because some of our viewers may not know what you mean by that.
Yeah. So if you think about steps think of supply chain as steps in a process. If you think of it more like a linear kind of fashion, mm-hmm. Those individual steps, whether they're raw material, processing steps, distance steps, cycle time steps, right? I'm thinking of all of the kind of dimensions. By default, if you shortened the amount of steps or you reduce the number of steps or the complexity, mm-hmm. you could potentially save money, save time, mm-hmm. Save resources. And this kind of goes to this thinking around supply chain as a cost driver itself, right? So I think some of the best thinking in supply chain is also tied to financial thinking, right? It's mm-hmm. not only how can we deliver things through this system, but also how can we deliver the finances that organizations need to be sustainable and our partners need to be sustainable.
Okay, so thinking about shortening of supply chain, thinking about the way that you mentioned L'Oreal was dealing with some of these, does that mean that we are going to see more local manufacturing? Is it, and And if so, is it going to be, like people are always wondering, are we going to start bringing manufacturing back to the US? You mentioned, I always think about the challenge that Apple had was that, yes, we could produce an iPhone in the US, but the problem is in China, you've got the iPhone producer, but all the way around them, you've got all the other small component producers.
Ecosystem.
In order to do it effectively, you then need to bring all of those other manufacturers back into the US.
Yeah.
So can you imagine a future where you've got local manufacturing for L'Oreal? So for products that are sold in the US, you've got manufacturing in the US, or is it just way more complex than that?
Andrew, that's a really great question, and I think the OEM, the Apples, the BMWs, Audis of the world have really taken that OEM approach where they're gathering around that local hub. From a consumer product point of view, I think the opportunity is to take a more distributed manufacturing approach, and at the same time, for our vertically integrated partners, I think part of it is how do we create agility even under our own roof, right? Modular systems of production. Because I think it's still going to be a little bit costly to ask all of your partners to say necessarily aggregate unless you're creating very, very high value products and very, very high value thing. But I think things like to go back to the Apple example, I think one thing that I've seen is their shift from Intel chips to internalizing that manufacturing to control costs, right? And I think to deliver on a portfolio strategy it's more broad, right? I'm intuiting they're delivering on a portfolio strategy that's more broad. So, I mean, those shifts in the context of the larger organization strategy, I think are important. But these shocks that we're feeling now, if companies have not found an agile supply or a way to create a more agile supply chain, they're suffering, right? So the way to design around that is inclusive of, as you said, OEM, but it's also it needs to be, I think, thought through from an ecosystem standpoint as well. I don't think that our supply ecosystems are going to go away. There are still centers of technology excellence that exist, but they're not going to go away overnight like this. We're finding ways to work with the existing ecosystem, but I think the immediate need is to begin creating that redundancy where we don't have it.
Okay, so you're a designer. We're talking about supply chain. Is there a way, do you see a way in which design, clever design, intuitive design can anticipate or help some of the concerns that you have about the global supply chain? Are there, I mean, in my head, I was thinking, well, if I'm worried about the supply of PET, is there any way in which I can design it so I could use PET or another plastic? So if PET suddenly have a problem with that because there's not enough recycled content, is there an alternative material that I can just drop in? Is there a way in which design can help that?
Well, Andrew, I almost might turn this back to you. As a designer, I believe Material Connection is a great resource for that question. But exactly to your point, design is a series of questions and decisions, right? I can use design with a capital D here, right? It's our systems, supply chains, products, experiences, services have all been designed. They've all been, there's a set of decisions that have been made. I think what you're begging, and I think this is right, is we have an opportunity to design new, better, less fragile systems and products. So yes, design does have a role to play, and it's already playing. And I'll use the example of the communities that have formed around PPE, the developing PPE solutions, right? So the shock to the supply chain is I can no longer bring in supplies from China. It just, A, the factory shut down, and B, it's going to take too long because my demand has spiked. So what communities have done, and I apologize, I'm the name just escapes me right now, but what communities of makers have done is they've taken technologies like 3D printing, like materials, just common materials that might be repurposed, and they've applied design thinking to them in order to create solutions, right? So it's very much that question: how might we develop a new solution with A, what we have on hand, B, with technologies that can help us make them faster without the heavy manufacturing equipment or machinery, distributed manufacturing model, in fact. So you've already seen a supply chain shift, right? And that supply chain shift is technology, it's distributed, and in some aspects it's sustainable, because you're looking for ways to use materials that are readily available to you, around you, not sourcing externally from afar.
You mentioned sustainability, and obviously that's a cornerstone of what you've done throughout your career. Like, do you feel like the post-COVID world is going to be more interested and more concerned and more dependent upon sustainable solutions? Because I remember we chatted earlier, and there's been the concern that when health is affected, then suddenly everything else goes out the window. Like if my family is affected, I don't care about anything else. Do you feel though that we're now becoming more aware of our actions, of what we use, of how we act, and then do you think that is going to end up with a more concern about sustainability? Or are you worried that as a result of the concerns about health, sustainability just goes by the wayside in preference for something that is single use, but therefore also sterile and clean and safe?
That's a great question, Andrew. And I have two parallel minds about this, and I use the analogy of sustainability and oil becoming cheap. Is now that oil's cheap, sustainability's out the window? Well, no, because the planet's still warming. We still need solutions to these challenges. Yes, cheap oil is a headwind, but it's a headwind. So I think it's important to kind of separate those things. The second part is, I think this choice, almost this polar choice between safety and sustainability. I think that's a false choice, to be completely honest with you. I just understand that the products that have been made available to us thus far have been in and of a time and an experience where things were disposable, right? Things were disposable. Now, and not only that, but a select group or grouping of users needed ready access to these materials, needed a mask to go outside, needed gloves to be able to go grocery shopping. The fundamental things that sustain people's ability to live, to be completely honest. So I do think that it is high time to reconsider our approaches to safety, and simple examples like this. My mother is now taking on this 1,000 mask challenge, right? She's partnering with a hospital to make 1,000 masks for people on the front lines. But these are reusable masks that can be washed, cleaned, etc. I think those types of approaches are very important and very critical right now as we move forward. I took a tour, 5-block radius tour of my neighborhood, and I saw no less than 350 individual pieces of PPE on the ground. And I actually have a GIS map of this. If anyone wants to see it, it's scary. And no, to be completely honest with you, it's scary, right?
Sure.
These are latex and nitrile gloves. And this was a month ago when it was just gloves. Now it's non-woven face masks, right? And so we have to think about, okay, let's think about what people are needing to do. People need to go grocery shopping. They need to get the things that they need to survive. They need to be able to interact with each other in a way that makes sense and that's safe. And then what are the tools that they're using to do that? And how can we make those tools better, healthy, safer, not only for ourselves, but also for the environment? Because I don't believe we can sustain that type of waste. Not only is that waste entering, it's ending up on the street, but it's also entering our septic systems and sewers. There are a lot of challenges there, right? So we can extrapolate from there.
Sure.
That's my point of view on the balance of safety and sustainability. It's not a black and white choice.
Right. Okay. Understood. Do you think, is there a government role in protecting, or do you feel like the government has a role in protecting or sort of directing supply chains? Do you feel like, obviously our government currently, the US government, is very particular about who it will, do business with and who, and the notice of tariffs. Do you think that governments are going to play a greater role, or do you still think that the market will out and it's basically up to the individual brands to sort out their challenges?
Wow. I definitely, what we're seeing is, so first, and hopefully we're moving forward from the critical aspect, right? The government leadership has been about how do we stave off a very high death rate. Like, that's keeping people alive is the first and foremost. I think as we're beginning to evolve, now we're beginning to see the role of local, state, and federal government. I can tell you this right now. I know this just from my experience working with these materials and understanding that there are a lot of manufacturers of, for instance, non-woven polypropylene materials that are having to go through those certification processes, right, for PPE equipment, for instance. And that takes time. I mean, it's almost as if, suddenly someone has opened a giant fire hose on a straw, right? There's only so many qualification resources out there for the need, for the demand, for the capabilities. What I am encouraged by is I have seen certain manufacturers actually pivot their business to support development and manufacturing of PPE equipment domestically in the United States. I do believe personally that the government does have a role in supporting that manufacturing infrastructure, but also helping to clear the hurdles to get materials qualified and into market as well.
But I still want to think about sustainability. Do you think that the oil comes from is global? The advantage we had with oil was always that you could get a similar quality version of plastic virtually all over the world. Whether it's come from Russia, the Middle East, the US, it was a global source. A lot of the more sustainable materials, you have limited sources. If it's coming from a bio-based material, it depends upon the harvest. It depends upon, if we think about the most, one of the simple ones, it's PLA plastic, the first sort of successful bioplastic that's been marketed probably 10, 15 years ago. It was based upon the fact that the US produces corn. Now, if you're living in a country which does not produce corn, you don't have a raw material for it. Do you see that our supply chain's going to get disrupted as we move towards more bio-based materials, which will have specific locations for harvesting?
Wow. That's a very good question. And Andrew, I might also offer that it's not only the specific locations for harvesting, but also climate change. What are climate change's effects on that corn crop, that yield, right? I think those are a little bit more long-term shifts, but what you're starting to see is these kind of shocks of extreme weather events and things like that. Also putting challenging that supply chain. To be honest with you, Andrew, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but what I am aware of is countries like Norway getting out of divesting from fossil fuels, right? To me, that's a signal that, again, same with, I believe JP Morgan has divested or they have put pressure on their portfolio to begin divesting. But I think what I'm interested in is the investment in that infrastructure. I do believe that localized crop, that localized material, we'll have to take a localized approach. I mean, unless it can be exported, sure. But I would agree with you that any type of supply chain shock will deliver a shock to the system. But I would say more, those technologies need to scale vis-a-vis our dependence on fossil fuels for packaging. So yes, I hope the investment comes along with that, to be completely honest with you. I hope the investment continues to support that.
Yeah, I feel like there has been a huge surge, certainly pre-COVID, huge surge in companies using natural resources, bio-based resources, and then talking them up. The challenge with obviously working for a global brand is that you require a level of sameness. You need to make sure that the look and feel and perception of the product is the same whether I buy in Nebraska or whether I buy in Tokyo or in somewhere in South America. Would we have to accept that there might be a slight change in that not everything would look the same, that a certain product from one location might look slightly different, might have a slightly different look and feel or appreciation because you've got more localized manufacturing? Working for McDonald's, one of the biggest challenges we had was, let's say we're sourcing a high pressure laminate to go on the wall or the countertop in a McDonald's. Their needs were, it has to be exactly the same color, whether I'm doing that in Brooklyn or whether I'm doing that in any other part of the US or even any part of Europe. Once they decided on one color scheme, that was it. That color scheme was used. And the challenge was not necessarily getting the right performance, but just the same color. Do you see that, with a global brand like oil, where you have to make sure that your value and the value of the brand is maintained, could we move perhaps beyond that, where you've got slightly different products for slightly different locations with slightly different requirements in terms of performance and look and feel?
That's a great question, and Andrew, I think you're absolutely right, and I know that that's already the case, right? Because think of it, right? L'Oreal is a house of 37 plus brands with different locations, different markets, right, that they serve. Yes, we expand the distribution to be global, and we hold product safety at the highest level, right? We do want to make sure, and we do make sure that our products are safe for our users, as well as they deliver the benefits that our consumers expect. The opportunity, I think, is where you have a house of brands like this, where you have different markets, to develop for that market. And I'll actually use the example of the sari in the Philippines, right? I think Unilever actually presented an excellent way of delivering value to the community. And I'm going to speak a little bit outside of materials per se, but to say that the format of the delivery was critical to delivering the value to the community. So in the Philippines, in India, one of the critical kind of retail outlets or places that people encounter buy their products and services is the mom and pop shop, literally downstairs from you or next to you in what might be a converted apartment or bodega type corner store, right? And the format of those stores is tiny, right? It's about the size of probably the room you and I are in, if not a little bit smaller. So, but what that dictates is the format, the form of the products that they are able to retail has to be on a smaller scale. Probably has to be flat packable, as flat as possible, or be able to be hung or things like this. Mm-hmm. On top of it, financially, from a business perspective, the consumer is probably going to use coin, right? A coinage to get access to that product or that brand. And so what you see is a shift from what we're used to, I guess, in the United States in a lot of regards, big one giant PET bottle of
yes.
Shampoo
yep.
into individual sachets, right? Now you're looking at a new material, a new format, right? And the magic is in two areas. One is being able to deliver that brand promise. That product is the brand promise, right? That delivers that promise is exactly as you said. And then on the other hand, how do you balance sustainability? Now we're talking about not only and financial sustainability, the ability for people to access these brands and experiences that are so critical for them, but also how do we make more sustainable choices in our materials so that when that sachet is used and say there's no recycling infrastructure, very little or no recycling infrastructure, that it doesn't compromise the environment.
Actually, I remember you mentioned being part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that commitment, and thinking about circular economy. You know, obviously knowing that plastics are still a major component of a lot of the packaging that you're using, that all major brands are using. And I know that there are various commitments that L'Oreal has made. Do you feel like that's the idea of that circularity, that we are going to be able to recycle? You know, yes, of course, the larger container of shampoo, if I'm buying something from Costco, that's a large volume of plastic. I have potential value in that, recycling that plastic. I compare that to the little tiny packet that a user in the Philippines is purchasing. Do you think there is the ability for us to move towards more circular, and does it then therefore mean we have to, so therefore we have to, you're saying that you need to make sure that those packets are available because people can't purchase more than that, but how do they fit into the circularity of and the desire for Ellen MacArthur Foundation to make sure everything goes back into the recycling stream or is compostable?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has given the companies that have signed on a real challenge, right? And they call it a moonshot challenge. For L'Oreal, that opportunity is to make 100% of our plastic packaging recyclable, refillable, or reclaimable, and or biodegradable. So the aspect, it does put pressure not only on ourselves to deliver, but also on our own supply chain. So as we talk about the supply chain, just to back out, just think about Ellen MacArthur, right? That is one of those big commitments that should be a huge signal to any supplier, to any solutions provider that says, look, here's where the market's going. We need to shift fundamentally. How might we, right? So I think there's a range, but I think one of the things that you alluded to was also how do we create, or not how do we create, but how does our ecosystem of recycling partners, the partners that help us make this promise come to life, how can they help deliver on that value? You know, for instance, I had the fortunate opportunity to visit the first pilot flexible packaging, the first pilot MRF that is capable of reclaiming and shipping out flexible packaging, right? Mm-hmm. And did you know, it just was fascinating to me that what it took was a little bit of investment, mm-hmm. and some technology that's been in practice in the Netherlands now for numbers of years, right? Not only that, there's the value component. Now that I can collect it, what value can be created out of that? And so the ability for that MRF to participate in a program that put a value on that form and format, mm-hmm. Was critical to delivering that sustainability, you know, delivering against that ability to make that solution more sustainable. So when we think about our supply chains, it's so important for us to think holistically, right, from end to end, as we're looking at solutions. And that's what Ellen MacArthur, that's what our sustainability commitments beg of us, is to do that.
Okay. Actually, yeah, for those people who may not be aware, one of the challenges of recycling flexible packaging is often that it is not a mono material. A large shampoo container might be a high-density polyethylene, one plastic. These flexible solutions tend to be multiple layers. And as Michael was saying, they're a challenge to recycle. So they haven't been recycled traditionally. They're simply just thrown in a landfill. So flexible packaging is faced with a problem that once you try and recycle it, it's relatively thin, small, lightweight, not an awful lot of material, and also you've got multiple layers. So, but I think yes, it is possible to reclaim and produce value from these. As I've always believed, if you ask chemists and engineers to solve these problems, they can do it. It's just no one had asked them until now. So yes, I've seen actually one of those manufacturing recycling locations. I think it was in Pennsylvania.
Correct.
Yeah, so it was government assisted, or at least, yeah, I think on the state level, or maybe even federal level. It was. Yeah,
I think again a great combination of local, federal, but also this consortium type of funding from, I believe it's Material Recyclers for the Future, yes. Material Recycling for the Future, which is a consortium effort that helps fund those endeavors.
Right. So yeah, it's always interesting to me that there's the innovation that just great minds are able to solve some of the problems that we thought were intractable and, you know, impossible and were, you know, the inevitable sort of waste created by flexible packaging. We're now starting to see some real viable solutions to that.
Yeah.
We're about out of time. Anything else? Any sort of final thoughts, Michael? Obviously, we've gone through a whole bunch of different things with sustainability, with the supply chain. Thank you so much for the insights. So, are you optimistic about our ability to meet some of those the challenges that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has put out? Do you feel as though this is a wonderful opportunity for brands to offer something which is more meaningful, more valuable, so that also deals with sustainability?
Absolutely.
Are you generally optimistic about the next few years?
Absolutely, I am actually extremely optimistic. If I could be extreme in my optimism, but what I see is opportunity. Right. And I think for the first time, and I go back to that example of realizing our chicken's not from the grocery store. For the first time, you know, we're having these layers kind of removed from in front of us as consumers. And I believe, if presented with the best choices, the right choices, we're empowered, we can be empowered to make the best decisions holistically, not only for our environment, sustainability in our environment, but also for ourselves and our families. One of the things that kind of keeps me up at night right now is, you know, in this COVID world, what's beauty? And fundamentally, right? Like, how do I feel beautiful? What's important to my beauty routine or my everyday personal routine? And I think when we begin asking ourselves these questions and listening, I think is one of the key aspects. As designers, we can listen and then begin trying to answer that. I think that's a really, that's why I'm optimistic, is because now, but unlike any other time, we have the opportunity to really lean in to providing those solutions and help. I also see the opportunity, you know, to shift what's important, but also to participate in ways that we haven't before. Personally, I support my community of Brooklyn, and I've found a way to also bring my supply chain experience, bring my product development experience into nutrition, thinking about food supply chains, thinking about nutrition supply chains in our community, and how do we support a community with within the intersection of nutrition, availability, exposure, and technology, enabling technology. And packaging is my core experience, but packaging can be such an enabler of unlocking those experiences for users, consumers, and people in need. And I really appreciate Material Connection as being that resource to help me understand not only individual solutions, but how solutions can be interrelated or interconnected in order to put them into practice.
Thank you. We're just about out of time. I know there's been a number of different questions. I've tried to include some of those as we had the conversation with Michael. We will try and answer some of those afterwards as well. So I want to make sure that all your voices are heard and that we can actually respond to some of those. So coming to the end of this, thank you, Michael. Always exciting to spend time with you. Very insightful. As always, you deliver on just such a great breadth and experience of knowledge. So I'm sure our viewers will very much appreciate the time spent. Thanks, Michael.
No, thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you both. And so we want to make sure that you all are aware that we have another webinar coming up next Wednesday, May 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern for Materials Matter Design Against Extinction, when we'll be speaking with Mitchell Joachim, co-founder of Terraform One and associate professor of practice at NYU. If you hang out until the very end of this event, you'll be redirected to the registration page. A reminder for anyone who has joined our event a bit late, a replay will be sent out to all of our registrants once we wrap up. Be sure to check your spam folder if you don't see it by this afternoon. Academic members will be receiving a separate link to the recording to share with students and faculty. And for more information about Material Connection, please feel free to visit materialconnection.com. And of course, if you'd love to learn more about Ynvisible Interactive, feel free to visit their website at ynvisible.com. If you have any remaining questions or comments from today's conversation, please send an email to pr@materialconnection.com. As Andrew said, we will be working to provide those of you that asked questions. There were so many questions coming in, it was hard to keep up with, and some of them are really excellent. And I think that just speaks to how topical this is, how important this is, what kind of conversations need to happen around this. So we're definitely going to make sure to follow up with answers to those questions as soon as we can. We thank you again for joining us, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a wonderful Wednesday, and we'll talk to you soon.